The third time Nara slipped out of her sleeping nest, she did not get caught. She had studied the corridor sensors for 6 full days. She knew the one near the east junction took 4 seconds longer to reset after it swept left. She knew the floor panels near the kitchen bay hummed when weight pressed them wrong. She knew all of this because she was 4 years old in dragon years, and 4-year-old Druvath were not supposed to be this careful. Elder Vuth always said Nara thought too much for her age. Nara considered that a compliment. She moved through the lower maintenance passage with her belly close to the floor. Her scales, a deep blue-green, the bulk of water in a dark place, caught no light because there was almost no light to catch. The passage smelled like recycled air and something faintly metallic. She did not mind. She was focused. She had one place to go. The glass garden sat at the top of Concord Station, Varath Southern like a bubble pushed upward from the rest of the structure. It was a dome of clear alley, so pure that standing inside it felt like standing in open space. Every species on the station was allowed to use it. Most did not bother. The Kalari found the open view made them anxious. The Druvath elders said it was a room designed for species that had not yet learned patience. Too much sky, not enough ceiling. Nara loved it completely. She pushed through the narrow access hatch at the base of the dome and stood up. There it was. The silver object. It hung in the black beyond the dome like a still, cold eye. It did not blink. It did not move much, just the slow drift of orbit, barely visible if you were not looking. But Nara was always looking. She had first seen it 8 nights ago through the small porthole near her sleeping nest, and since then it had taken up space in her dreams in a way she could not explain. It looked, she thought, exactly like the thing Elder Vuth described in the old night prayer, the cold silver eye that watches the sleepers of the warrior world. She was so focused on it that she did not notice the human sitting on the floor until she was already 3 meters inside the dome. Nara stopped. The human was female. She was sitting cross-legged near one of the observation benches, but not on it, on the actual floor, with a small screen propped against her knee. She had her head tilted back slightly, looking at Morrow below, not at the silver object. Her hair was dark and pulled back loosely. She wore the grey uniform of a research officer with a small gold thread at the collar that meant Xenobiology Division. Nara had seen her before, at meals, in the corridor once. She was the human they had all been told about, the first one ever assigned to a Druvath Menchu station. The elders called her an experiment in diplomacy. Rull called her the soft one. Nara had not called her anything yet because they had never spoken. The human noticed her. She did not gasp. She did not jump up. She did not reach for anything. She simply turned her head and looked at Nara with a calm, steady expression, the way you look at something surprising that does not seem dangerous. Neither of them moved. Then Nara did something she had not planned. She lifted one small claw and pointed it past the human, at the silver object in the sky. "Is that the moon?" she asked. Her Concord standard language was precise. Druvath children were taught to speak formally before they were taught to run. Nara's grammar was better than most adults on the station. The human looked at where she was pointing. She was quiet for a moment. Then she did something Nara had not expected. She set down her screen. She moved from the bench to the floor. She sat cross-legged, right there on the cold dome floor, and looked at Nara at eye level. "No," she said, "but it is something like one." Nara stared at her. "What is it?" "It is called a relay satellite. My people built it a long time ago. It got lost. The Concord found it and put it in orbit here." The human paused. "My name is Sira." "I know," Nara said. "You are the experiment." Sira's mouth moved in a way Nara had learned was a human expression for amusement that was also a little sad. "I have been called that, yes." Nara looked back at the satellite. "It looks like the moon in the old prayer." "What prayer?" Nara opened her mouth, then closed it. Elder Vuth had not told her the prayer was secret, but she had not told her it was not secret either. Nara decided to say nothing about it yet. She was 4, not foolish. "A sleeping prayer," she said. "Elder Vuth teaches it." Sira nodded slowly. She did not push. She just looked at the satellite too. They sat like that for a while, a human on the floor and a baby dragon beside her, both looking at the same silver object drifting through the dark. It was the most comfortable Nara had felt on the station in weeks. Then the hatch behind her opened and Roll's voice came through it, sharp and low. "Nara, you are supposed to be in your nest." She did not move immediately. She looked at Sira one more time. Sira looked back. She did not say anything, but she also did not look away. Nara turned and walked toward Roll. He grabbed her gently by the back ridge of her neck, the way older dragons did with young ones, and steered her out of the dome, muttering about senses and rules and what Elder Vuth was going to say. He did not notice that he looked back at the human once before the hatch closed. He noticed it himself, though. He said nothing about it. He was going to report this, but when he stood in front of Elder Vuth's door, he found himself describing it differently than he had planned. He said the child and the human had sat quietly, that there had been no danger, that it had been strange but not wrong. Vuth listened, with her eyes half closed. "Watch them," she said finally. "Do not interfere yet." Roll left. Vuth sat still for a long time after. On the other side of the station, in the glass garden, Sira picked up her screen again, but she did not look at Morrow anymore. She looked at the satellite. She had catalogued it months ago, logged its signal as standard non-linguistic background broadcast, closed the file. Now she opened it again. She was not sure why. Nobody gave Nara permission. She simply went back. The next evening cycle, she used the same route, East Junction, 4-second gap, belly low through the maintenance passage. She was in the glass garden before the third station light had dimmed to its night setting. Sira was already there. This time she was not sitting on the floor. She was standing near the far edge of the dome with her back to the hatch, looking up at the satellite. She heard Nara come in and turned around. She did not look surprised. She looked like someone who had quietly expected this. She sat down on the floor again. Nara walked over and sat beside her. They did not talk much that night. Nara watched the satellite. Sira made notes on her small screen. At one point Nara asked, "Do all human worlds have moons?" And Sira said, "Not all, but ours does, one large one, very old." And Nara said, "How old?" And Sira told her, and Nara thought about that number for a very long time without speaking. They sat until Nara's internal sense of time told her she needed to go back before Roll's next check. She stood up, shook out her wings, still too small, still dragging at the tips, and walked toward the hatch. At the door she stopped. "I will come back," she said. "I know," said Sira. After that it became a routine, 6 days in a row, then 10. Roll found out on day 3 he was not as foolish as Nara sometimes assumed, but he said nothing to Vuth yet. He told himself he was still observing. He was not ready to admit he was also a little curious. The conversations grew longer slowly. Nara asked questions the way she did everything else, carefully, one at a time, as though she had been thinking about each one for days before she spoke it, which she had. "Did you build the silver eye to watch your sleepers?" Sira thought about that for a moment. "We built it to listen, to send and receive signals from deep space, to watch in a way but outward, not downward." "Why does your species build things and then let them drift?" Sira looked at her for a moment. "We do not always mean to. Sometimes things get lost. Sometimes there is no one left to bring them home." Nara absorbed this without comment, but she turned the satellite with her eyes, following its slow path across the dome. On the 8th night, she recited the prayer. She did not plan it. It came out of her the way things come out of children, without warning, because the moment felt like the right container for it. She was sitting close to the dome glass, her nose nearly touching the surface, and the satellite was directly overhead. She said it quietly in Old Dravath, which Sira did not speak. Then she said it again in Concord Standard, translating as she went, the way Voth had taught her. "The cold silver eye watches the sleepers of the warrior world. It carries their first word. It holds the dark gently, the way a claw holds water, careful not to crush, careful not to let go. She stopped. Sira had gone very still. And then there is one more line, Nara said. Elder Voth always says it at the end, before the sleeping lights go down. She says, Nara paused, making sure she had the translation right. They were not afraid. Silence. Sira's voice, when she spoke, was careful, measured, the way voices get when something has landed in them hard and the person is trying not to let it show. Who wrote that prayer? It is very old. Elder Voth says it has been in our family for many generations. She does not know who first made it. Nara tilted her head. Do you know it? No, Sira said, but as she stopped herself. Nara watched her. She was learning to read human faces. They moved a great deal more than Draveth faces did, and they were honest in a way that was almost embarrassing. Sira's face right now said, I have just seen something I do not yet understand, and I need to think before I speak. Nara respected that. It was what she would have done. What is it? Nara asked. I am not sure yet, Sira said. I need to check something. That was the night Sira stopped taking notes about the planet Morrow and started pulling up old signal files on her small screen instead. Nara did not ask what she was looking for. She trusted that if Sira found it, she would say so. She went back to watching the satellite. The next morning, Elder Voth called Rael into her chamber. She was old in a way that was hard to look at directly, scales faded to the color of old silver, one eye clouded, the ridges above her brow so worn they had softened into curves. She sat in the way large ancient things sit, with a weight that made the room feel smaller. You have been watching the child, she said. Yes, and the human. Rael said nothing, which Voth took as confirmation. Tell me what you see. He thought about it. He was a young adult Draveth, which meant he still made the mistake of answering quickly when he was nervous. He caught himself and breathed first. Nara asks her questions, he said. The human answers them. They sit together. They look at the old satellite. He paused. The human listens to Nara completely, the way elders listen, not just waiting for silence to end, but actually taking in what is said. Voth was quiet. Last night, Rael continued, Nara recited the night prayer. Voth's good eye moved to him slowly. The full prayer, he said, in Concord Standard. The room was very still. Voth did not look angry. She looked like someone who had been expecting a door to open for a long time and now heard the handle turn. Continue watching, she said. Her voice was the same as always, stone, patience, age, but something under it had shifted. Something had changed in the weight of the room. Rael left. Voth sat alone. She had not spoken the ending of that prayer aloud in 40 years. Not since the last elder before her had passed it down, pressing the old Draveth root words into her memory like a seal into wax, and said, You must keep this until you know what it means. She had kept it. She had never known what it meant. She was beginning to wonder if the answer had just walked onto her station in a grey research uniform. The signal file had been sitting in the Concord archive for 11 years. It had been logged when a Kelari salvage crew first found the satellite drifting near the outer boundary of Morrow's system. Standard procedure: scan, catalog, classify file. The automated system had swept the satellite's broadcast frequency, found no recognized linguistic pattern, and labeled it non-linguistic static. The file had been closed and forgotten inside 17 layers of bureaucratic archive, the way old things always are, not deleted, just buried under the weight of newer things. Sira had filed it herself 11 months ago when she first arrived on Verath 7 and conducted a full inventory of the station's recorded data on human-built objects in the region. She had noted it. She had moved on. She did not move on anymore. She pulled the raw signal file that same night she heard Nara recite the prayer. She put it on her screen and looked at it until the station's artificial dawn started warming the corridor lights outside her lab. She did not sleep. She had a feeling she could not name pressing at the back of her mind, the kind of feeling she had learned over years of field research to take seriously. The signal looked like noise. It always had. Peaks and valleys with no obvious structure, no repeating word shape, no phoneme cluster that any of the Concorde's translation systems would recognize. But Sierra was not using a Concorde translation system. She was using a mathematical filter she had built herself years before for a different project, a protocol designed to find prime sequence harmonics in background signal noise. It was a tool built on an old human theory that if any species ever tried to make first contact with an unknown civilization, the most universal language they could use would be mathematics. Prime numbers did not change depending on who was counting them. She ran the filter. She went to sleep for 4 hours. She ate a meal she did not taste. She came back. The result was on her screen. She sat down slowly. The signal was not static. It had never been static. Beneath the noise, running in a clean and patient loop, was a structure built entirely from prime sequence intervals. It was a mathematical language, elementary, deliberate, designed to be decoded by someone who did not share a spoken tongue. She had seen this structure before, in old records, in a history course she had taken before she ever became a scientist. It was called the Varron Protocol, named after the engineer who designed it, built during humanity's early satellite era when they were first sending machines into deep space and daring to imagine that something out there might receive them. Every satellite built under the Varron Protocol carried the same encoded message in its emergency beacon. It was considered a romantic, impractical gesture by most of the scientific community at the time. The engineer who designed it said, "If we are going to send something into the dark, we should at least say hello." Sierra's hands moved across her screen with the care of someone diffusing something precious. The decoding took 3 more hours. The message was short. It had been designed to be short, something any intelligence could receive and hold. When it finished resolving, she read it once. Then she read it again. Then she put both hands flat on her desk and breathed. "We are here, we are watching, we do not know if you exist, but if you do, we made this for you, we are not afraid." She sat with it for a long time. The lab was quiet. The station ran its usual hum of recycled air and distant machinery. Outside her small porthole, Morrow turned slowly, its dusty surface lit by the local star's pale light. She opened a second file. The Concorde's Linguistic Archive, public access, all known recorded languages of member species, organized by age and family tree. She typed a search. Old Draveth, root language, pre-Concorde. She was not sure what she was looking for. She put in the phrase anyway, translated phonetically as close as she could from what Nara had recited. They were not afraid. The search returned one result. A fragment filed under Draveth Cultural Records, pre-Concorde period, classified as religious text of uncertain origin. Age, estimated 900 years minimum. The fragment was 3 lines. The last line read, in direct translation from Old Draveth root language. "And they were not afraid." Sierra stared at the screen for a very long time. The satellite was 200 years old. The prayer was 900. She closed her eyes. She opened them. The numbers did not change. She typed the formal request for full archive access to the satellite's signal, all of it, not just the portion logged at initial capture. She needed the complete broadcast history. She filed it through Director Oman's office and went to find something to eat because her hands had started to feel unsteady and she had learned that sometimes the body needed to be taken care of before the mind could work again. Director Oman's reply came back in 2 hours. "Denied." The satellite, though human-built, was registered Concorde property. Full signal archive access required a committee review, 12 species representatives, minimum 3 cycles of deliberation. Standard procedure for accessing communications data stored on non-active territorial assets. Sierra read the denial twice. She did not argue. She had learned, from years of working inside large institutions, that arguing with a procedure was like arguing with weather. You did not fight it. You found the path around it. She already had what she needed. She had the portion that was captured at initial scan, logged, public, hers to analyze freely. She had run her filter. She had her translation. She had the prayer fragment from the public archive. She did not need more to know that something extraordinary had happened, something that could not be explained by coincidence and could not be quietly buried back under 11 years of archive dust. She sat back down at her desk. She opened her research log, private, encrypted, the one she kept for thoughts too unformed to put in an official report yet. She wrote one line. Either this is the greatest coincidence in recorded interspecies history, or someone translated this prayer into a mathematical signal before we knew the Draveth existed, or the Draveth prayer was written in response to a signal we do not know they received. She saved it. Then she got up and went to find Nara. She needed to hear the prayer again, all of it, every word. And she needed to ask one question she had not thought to ask before. Where did Elder Voth say the prayer came from? Sira did not find Nara. She found Elder Voth. The old dragon was standing in the corridor outside Sira's lab, which was not possible in any ordinary sense. Voth's personal quarters were in the Elder Wing, 3 full sections away, and she had not been seen in the research wing since the station's opening ceremony. She stood the way mountains stand, without apology, without hurry, occupying exactly as much space as she required. Her good eye found Sira before Sira had fully turned the corner. Sira stopped walking. Voth said nothing for a moment. She looked at Sira the way very old things look at very young things, not with cruelty, but with a weight of time that could feel like judgment if you were not careful. You found something, Voth said. It was not a question. Her Concord standard was perfect and old-fashioned, each word given its full syllable, the way the language had been spoken a century ago. Yes, Sira said. Come with me. Voth did not wait to see if Sira followed. She turned and walked slowly, with the deliberate pace of something that had stopped being in a hurry several centuries ago, toward the end of the corridor where a small, rarely used meeting room sat behind a plain door. She pushed it open. She went inside. Sira followed. The room had 2 benches and a table and no decoration of any kind. Voth lowered herself onto the bench that was wider, built for Draveth frames. She folded her forelegs and looked at Sira. Tell me what you found, she said. Exactly, leave nothing out. Sira had worked with difficult people her entire career. She had learned that the fastest way through a hard conversation was directness. She sat down on the other bench and told Voth everything: the signal file, the Varren protocol, the decoded message, the linguistic archive search, the prayer fragment, the age gap. She did not soften it. She did not speculate beyond what the evidence showed. She laid it out like data because that was what it was. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Voth sat still for so long that Sira began to wonder if she had understood. Then the old dragon drew a slow breath, a sound like stone settling, and began to speak. The prayer, she said, is not ancient. It is a translation. Sira went very still. My ancestor, Voth said, was a scholar, a listener. She spent her life trying to understand signals that came from beyond our mapped space. She paused. 900 years ago, she intercepted a signal, faint, distant, from a region of space that no Draveth ship had ever reached. Sira did not speak. She did not move. She could not decode it with any language tool she had, so she built one. She worked on it for 20 years. She was old when she finished. Voth's voice did not change, but something around her eyes tightened briefly. What she decoded was short. She wrote it down. She read it many times. Voth said the words in Old Draveth first. Then, slowly, she translated them into Concord Standard. We are here, we are watching. We do not know if you exist, but if you do, we made this for you. We are not afraid. The room was silent for a long moment. She did not know what species sent it, Voth continued. She did not know where it originated. She could not follow the signal back. The technology did not exist. She had no way to respond. A pause. She was afraid, I think, not of the message, of what it meant, that something out in the dark had spoken and had not been afraid to do so, and she had no way to answer. She felt the weight of that for the rest of her life. Sira's voice came out carefully, so she put it in a prayer. She translated it into Old Draveth. She embedded it in a sleeping ritual that her family already used. She changed one word, she made it third person, so it would sound like a description of someone else, not a message she had received, and she passed it down. Voth looked at Sira steadily. She told her children what it truly was, and they told their children, and so it came to me, and I told Nara it was simply old words for sleeping. Sira was quiet for a moment. Why did she keep it secret? Voth considered, because the Concord at that time did not know your species existed, because she did not know what kind of thing had sent that message, whether it was alive, whether it was dangerous, whether it was still out there. She was a careful woman. The old dragon's voice dropped slightly, and I think because the message made her feel something she did not have words for yet. She wanted to hold it close before she gave it to the world. Sira thought about a woman 9 centuries dead, sitting alone with a 20-year translation, reading 4 sentences over and over in a language she was the first to understand. She thought about the satellite, still broadcasting, patient and quiet in the dark. The satellite we have in orbit, Sira said slowly, was built 200 years ago. Same protocol, same message. Your ancestor received an earlier transmission, a different satellite, a different era, but the same words, because they were always the same words. It was the standard message for all of them. Voth nodded once. For 900 years, Sira said, a Draveth elder has been putting a human message to sleep inside her grandchildren. She had not meant to say it like that, but Voth did not flinch from it. She looked at Sira with her one clear eye and was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said, that is what happened. The door of the meeting room opened. Director Oman stood in the frame, his bioluminescent antennae cycling through yellow-orange, which meant urgency in Kelari body language. He looked between Sira and Voth with an expression that said he had hoped to find one of them and was unprepared to find both. There is a problem, he said. A faction within the Concord has filed a motion. They want the satellite decommissioned. The signal has been reclassified as an unsanctioned territorial broadcast. They have the votes. He paused. The session is in 48 hours. Sira looked at Voth. Voth looked at Sira. Neither of them moved toward the door yet. Outside, the station ran its quiet business. In the glass garden, visible through a distant porthole at the end of the corridor, the satellite drifted slowly through the dark, still broadcasting, still patient, still carrying its 4 sentences into the silence. The way it always had, the way it was built to do, long before anyone knew what was listening. The faction leader's name was Des. She was Kelari, older than Oman, with antennae that had gone a permanent pale grey, which in Kelari culture meant seniority, but which on Des seemed to mean something closer to calcification. She had been on the Concord's Interspecies Council for 30 years. She had opinions about junior species and their place in the order of things, and she had filed them in official language so many times they had become policy. Her argument for decommissioning the satellite was technically correct. The satellite was in Concord-controlled space. Its broadcast had never been formally authorized under Concord communication law. Humanity was a junior member and had not existed as a recognized species when the satellite was built. The signal was, by the letter of the law, an unsanctioned transmission. Oman had 48 hours and not enough votes. He came to Sira's lab to tell her this in person, which she appreciated. He stood in the doorway with his antennae cycling dim amber, the Kelari color for I am sorry, and also I am not sure what else to do. I cannot override a filed motion without a counter-argument that carries weight with the council, he said. A scientific finding would need peer review. A diplomatic case would need a human representative at a level above your rank. I have neither the time nor, he stopped. I am sorry, Sira. I wish I could do more. You have done what you can, she said. He left. Sira sat in her lab for a while. She looked at the decoded message on her screen. She looked at the prayer fragment in the archive window beside it. She thought about the right thing to do, the political thing, the smart thing, the thing that would work within the system she was inside. Then she closed her screen, got up, and went to the glass garden. Nara was already there. This did not surprise Sira. The baby dragon had developed a sense for when Sira would come, the way animals developed a sense for weather. She was sitting near the dome wall, wings half spread and dragging on the floor because they still could not hold her weight, watching the satellite with an expression that Sira had come to recognize as deep thought wearing the face of stillness. Rael was behind her, sitting on a bench, pretending to be bored. Sira sat down on the floor beside Nara. She looked at the satellite for a moment. Then she told them both everything, Voth's secret, her ancestors' translation, the 900 years, all of it. She told it simply and without drama, the way she had told Voth, because the facts were dramatic enough without any help. Nara listened without moving. When Sira finished, the baby dragon was quiet for so long that Rael made a small sound to check that she was still breathing. She was simply thinking. Then Nara said, "Your people said we are not afraid into the dark before they even knew we were there." "Yes, and my great-grandmother's grandmother kept it and sang it to her children and her children's children until it reached me." "Yes." Nara was still for another moment. Then she turned her head and looked at Sira directly, in the full Draveth way that meant, "I am giving you my complete attention," which was a significant thing for a Draveth to give. "That is the bravest thing I have ever heard," she said. She stood up, she turned around and walked toward the hatch. Rael stood too. "Where are you going?" "To see Elder Voth," Nara said. He followed her. Sira watched them go. Nara found Voth in her chamber, which was not a small thing to do. The Elder Wing was not officially restricted to children, but convention made it so. Young Draveth did not simply walk into an Elder's personal space unannounced. Nara knocked on the frame, waited for the sound that meant enter, and walked in. Voth was sitting in her large chair with her eyes closed. She opened them when Nara came in. She did not look surprised. Nara stood in front of her great-grandmother and said, "They are going to take the silver eye away. The council." "I know," Voth said. "You have to speak at the session." Voth said nothing. "You have to tell them what you told Sira," Nara said. "You have to tell them about your ancestor, about the prayer, about the 20 years. She held Voth's gaze with a steadiness that was not common in 4-year-olds, but was apparently common in this particular one. "They will not listen to Sira. She is human and she is junior. They will not listen to Oman. He does not have enough standing, but they will listen to you." "I have not spoken in a Concord open session in 40 years, Voth said. "I know," said Nara. "You told me that silence is sometimes the wisest word." She paused. "But you also told me that the bravest thing is knowing when it is over." The old dragon looked at her great-granddaughter for a long time. Then she stood up. The Concord session room held 32 representatives seated in curved tiers. Des sat at the central table with her motion already filed and her votes already counted. She looked confident in the way people look when they believe the outcome is already decided. Voth walked in, and the room changed temperature. Elders of her age and standing did not appear in sessions. It simply did not happen. Several representatives straightened without realizing they had done it. Oman at the head table went very still. Voth did not ask for the speaking floor. She was old enough that the room simply gave it to her, a dozen years of Concord protocol clearing the air around her without anyone saying a word. She stood at the center and spoke the prayer. In Old Draveth first. The sounds were deep and layered, root language that almost no one in the room had ever heard spoken aloud. Then in Concord Standard, slowly, giving each line its full weight. When she finished, she explained what it was. All of it, her ancestor, the 20 years, the signal from the dark, the choice to hide it in a sleeping song. She told it without apology and without decoration, the way very old truths get told when the time for hiding them is finally done. The room was completely silent. This satellite, Voth said, has been broadcasting humanity's first word for 200 years. That same word was spoken 900 years ago, and we have been answering it in our sleep ever since. You wish to silence the echo, but the conversation has already happened. You are simply the last to know. She stopped speaking. She waited. Dessa's antennae cycled through 3 colors and went still. The vote failed. The satellite would not be decommissioned. Rael was standing at the back of the chamber. He had come in quietly, without telling anyone, and stood near the door for the whole session. When it ended, he walked out into the corridor and found Sira waiting outside. He stopped in front of her. He was quiet for a moment. "Your people are very strange," he said. He said nothing else for a breath. "It is not an insult," he added. He walked away before she could answer. Behind him, inside the chamber, Elder Voth stood in the silence of 32 representatives who did not know what to say and looked like someone who had put down something heavy, not because she had dropped it, but because she had finally, after a very long time, found the right place to set it. Something shifted on Verath 7 in the weeks after the session. It happened slowly, the way large things change, not a sudden break but a slow turn, like a tide adjusting. The Draveth elders who had previously looked through Sira when she passed them in the corridor began to look at her, not warmly. Draveth were not warm by default, and no amount of revelation was going to change 4 centuries of social habit, but they saw her now. They acknowledged her when she entered a shared space. One elder, a very old male named Fath, who had not spoken to a non-Draveth in 15 years, by all accounts, stopped Sira near the supply corridor one morning and said simply, "Your people make good satellites," and walked away before she could respond. Rael told her later that this was the equivalent of a formal commendation. She chose to believe him. Nara was given permission, officially and in writing from the Elder Council, to use the glass garden unsupervised during approved study hours. This was unprecedented for a Draveth child of her age. The approval document listed the reason as advanced observational study. Sira suspected Voth had written the language herself. Nara began spending half her approved hours in Sira's lab instead. She was learning prime sequence harmonics, not because anyone assigned it to her, because she had decided she wanted to understand exactly how the satellite's message had been built, the actual mathematics of it, the way the intervals were chosen, the logic of choosing a language that could survive across species. She was very fast. She asked questions that a human student would not have thought to ask for another decade of study. Sira found a small stool that was the right height for a Draveth child to sit at a human-height desk and put it next to her own station. It became Nara's spot. Director Oman came by the lab one afternoon and stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the two of them side by side over a signal diagram. He did not say anything. He sent a memo to the station council that evening recommending an expansion of the Xenobiology Division's resource allocation. He listed no specific reason. Voth came to the lab once, alone, late in a night cycle, when Nara was already asleep in her nest. She stood inside the door and looked around the small room, at the screens, the diagrams, the stool beside Sira's station, the satellite signal pattern printed on a long sheet of graphing paper pinned to the wall. She looked at all of it for a while without speaking. Then she said, "My ancestor was afraid of what she might find if she had followed the signal, traced it back." Sira waited. She thought, Voth continued, that a species which spoke to a dark it could not know was listening must be either foolish or desperate. She was a careful woman, my ancestor, very logical. She believed that reaching into the unknown without certainty of safety was a kind of weakness. A pause. She was wrong. The words came out slowly, in the way of someone who has held a private judgment for a long time and is now setting it down publicly for the first time. I see that now. It was not foolish. It was not desperate. It was, she stopped, started again. It was the right thing to do, to speak, even without knowing. She left without saying anything else. Sira sat for a long time after. The final scene of the story, the one that would stay with Sira for the rest of her career, the one she would describe in papers and presentations and late-night conversations with colleagues who asked what it had really been like, happened on an ordinary night cycle 3 weeks after the session. Nara was in the glass garden alone. The satellite was overhead at the top of its arc, its silver casing catching the light of Morrow's sun from below the planet's horizon in a way that made it glow faintly, a cold, steady point of light in the black. Sira found her there. She had not planned to come. She had been walking back from a late data session, and the hatch was on her route, and something pulled her in, the same wordless thing that had always pulled her from the very first night. She sat down beside Nara on the floor. They looked at the satellite together. After a while, Nara said, "I keep thinking about the humans who built it, the first ones, the ones who built the satellite that your ancestors' colleague launched 900 years ago, before the Concorde, before anyone knew there was anything else out there." "What do you think about them?" Sira asked. "I think they must have been afraid," Nara said. "Space was new to them, they did not know what was in it, and they built a machine, and they put a message inside it, and they sent it away." She paused. "Did they know someone would hear?" "No," Sira said. "They hoped. That is different." Nara was quiet for a moment. "Is that why your species is so," she searched for the right word, "persistent, because you learn to hope before you learn to know?" Sira thought about this. It was the kind of question that deserved a real answer, not a fast one. She thought about the engineers who had designed the Varren protocol. She thought about them sitting in a room, arguing about whether to include a message at all, whether it was practical, whether it was silly, whether anyone would ever receive it. She thought about the one who had pushed for it anyway, who had said, "If we are going to go out there, we should at least say hello." She thought about 900 years of Dravath children being sung to sleep with 4 human sentences they did not know were human. Then she leaned slightly toward Nara, toward the baby dragon the size of a large animal, with wings that still could not lift her, sitting on the floor of a station dome staring at a satellite as though it were a moon, and she spoke quietly. "I think we hope," she said, "because the dark is very large and we are very small, and we decided that was not a reason to be quiet." Nara was still. The satellite drifted above them, patient and cold and shining. Then Nara said, "I am going to learn everything about your species." Sira smiled. "I know, I am counting on it." 3 days later, Director Oman filed a formal recommendation with the Concorde's Cultural Registry. He recommended that the satellite be reclassified as a protected interspecies cultural artifact, the first human-built object to receive that designation in the Concorde's 400-year history. In the notes section of the filing, he wrote one line. "The Dravath have been answering this message for 9 centuries. It seems right to let the humans know it was received." The recommendation passed unanimously. The satellite was given a formal name at the small ceremony that followed, the kind of ceremony the Concorde held for significant things, quiet and brief, with no speeches and a great deal of official silence. The name was proposed by Elder Voth and seconded by every Dravath representative present, which was itself an unprecedented thing. They called it Firstvord, the old Dravath word for the sound a voice makes before it knows what it is saying. On the day the name was registered, Nara sat in Sira's lab and looked at the satellite's signal pattern on the graphing paper pinned to the wall. She had been studying it for weeks. She had already begun drafting, in her neat and precise young handwriting, a set of mathematical variations on the Varren protocol, improvements, really, for a species that had been thinking about the problem longer and from a different angle. She did not show Sira yet. She was not finished. But she would be. In the glass garden, high above the station's daily business, the satellite that had once been logged as non-linguistic static turned slowly in the dark. Still broadcasting, still patient, carrying 4 sentences into a silence it had never once stopped trusting would someday answer back. It looked from the dome below exactly like a moon.